slides?
Yeah. Did I not do that yet?
No, not yet, but I mean,
I'll do that today. Okay, so we're focusing on the biggest component of your exam, which are the securities. I always joke, the securities industry essential exam, and the thing that is essential is securities. We wouldn't exist without securities. We've talked about mutual funds. We said mutual funds are going to be huge. That's a common thread through all your exams. So if we can overlearn those mutual funds, it'll pay big dividends on our future exams, as well as stay focused on the exam we're on. But that being said, learn it once, get tested twice. We talked about bonds, and now we're going to talk about equity. We're going to talk about characteristics of common stocks. We're going to talk about the dividend process for stocks, and we're going to talk about the benefits of owning common stock, as well as the risks of owning common stock. So in our corporate charter, so there's various types of business structures. And if I go to an attorney and say, I want to start a business, he's going to say, well, Dean, there's several forms of ownership. You know, what kind of ownership do you want? Do you want to set up an LLC, a partnership, a subchapter S, a sole proprietorship? And I said, well, I plan on raising lots of capital someday. I hope to build a major business. And he said, well, attorney says, Dean, the best vehicle for raising large amounts of capital is a corporation. Because if you set up a corporation, then you can issue securities. There is no such thing as a corporation that has not issued common stock. Now, we may choose to issue other things, preferred stock or bonds or whatever, but all starts with common stock. We're going to get what's called a corporate charter. In our corporate charter, we're going to say, what are the maximum number of shares we can issue under terms of our charter? Right? So as an attorney, I'm not an attorney, but if I was, I'd say, well, listen, we probably should authorize more shares than we plan on issuing because someday, we might want to do a follow-on and raise some additional financing. So the maximum number of shares a corporation can issue under terms of its charter is authorized. And so in this example, maybe the corporation decides that they're going to authorize 100 million shares. Issued shares, we'll call this A, B, C, D. These could be definitional questions on your test, are shares that have been placed with investors. Right, so here it would be a million shares. It'd be interesting to see what the corporate charter of Petrobras is. I mean, my God, I would imagine they've authorized 1 billion shares.
Oh yeah, I'm
issued,
sure.
2 billion shares, right? And maybe, maybe we decide to issue to investors 1 million shares. So those are shares that have actually been placed. As you see now, we actually could go back and tap the capital markets and raise an additional or sell an additional 99 million shares. Outstanding, the reason I'm kind of putting these definitionals down there is because you could expect to get an answer set where we have A, B, C, D, and then depending on what we ask you would depend on your appropriate response. If I say the maximum number of shares a corporation can issue under terms of its charter, we would say authorized. If we say shares that have been placed with investors, we would say issued. Outstanding is issued less Treasury. Treasury stock, a stock that has been bought back by the issuer. We associate Treasury stock with mature, stable businesses. Because, we wouldn't assume that a company early in its life stage is going to have excess capital and be spending money buying back its own stock. So we have no treasury stock. Well, then the issue would be the same as the outstanding. Treasury stock, we'll talk about that in just a sec. So we have authorized but unissued 99 million shares. Treasury stock, as we said, is shares. Let's call this D choice. D choice. Boom. We'll call this D. Treasury stock are shares or stock that have been purchased. Sometimes we say that is retired by the corporation. They say shares have been purchased or retired by the corporation. You know, Larry Ellison, Teresa, owns 1 billion shares of Oracle. 1 billion shares. And he used to own 20% of Oracle. He's bought no more shares. He still has 1 billion shares of Oracle. But now he owns 44% of Oracle, which that's a neat trick. How did Larry Ellison have 1 billion shares of Oracle that represented 20% of Oracle? And now the same billion shares represents 44% of Oracle because Oracle has been buying back lots of its stock into the Treasury. And as it reduces the number of shares outstanding, that billion shares becomes a greater proportion of the outstanding stock. They have spent so much money, Teresa, buying back the stock at Oracle that Standard & Poor's has lowers their credit rating. And, you know, what does Oracle say about their credit rating? They say, we don't care about a credit rating. We care about our shareholders, particularly Larry Ellison, right? So, you know, they don't really care what they got to pay. By the way, when they make acquisitions, and they've been buying up lots of companies, they don't pay with stock. The reason they don't pay with stock is because that would cause Larry's ownership to go down, right? So they are going to issue bonds to pay for that. Now, 2 testable components to know about Treasury stock. Treasury stock pays no dividends. And Treasury stock has no voting rights. You know, and by the way, so right now, if we bought 200,000 shares of the Treasury, we would now have 800,000 shares outstanding. And that 200,000 shares that we bought into the Treasury would have no voting rights and pay no dividends, for example.
But the authorized but unissued, let's say that I bought back
Yeah, those could come out of retirement. Good question. Yeah. So we could right now, if we bought back 200,000 shares, let's say we did that, the board said, let's buy back 200,000 shares. And if we did, that would mean we could issue 99,200,000 because the stock that is in the Treasury can be reissued. Right. If we go past that 100 million, we're going to have to amend the corporate charter, and amending the corporate charter would require shareholder approval. And that makes sense, right? Because every time they issue more shares, we get diluted, right? I mean, you know, I was joking about Howard Schultz. He has never sold a share of Starbucks, but you know, he only owns like 4.9% last time I saw. But that's because the Starbucks over the years have issued all kinds of stock, right? And so his proportion ownership has gone down as a result of that. Common stock ownership. Yeah. So when you own common stock, you're an owner. You know, I like to walk through the Costco and say, not only am I a member of Costco, I'm an owner. I own 0.00000000001%. Right? So that's what you are when you own common stock. You're an owner with the rights and privileges of being an owner in a business and the risks of being an owner in a business. And so when we purchase common stock, we can purchase a common stock for growth. You know, the only 2 ways we're ever going to make money in an investment is income stream and or price appreciation. So if there's no income stream, the only way we're going to make money is price appreciation. So if a stock does not pay a dividend, well, then the only way we're going to make money is to sell that to someone else for more than we originally paid. So we have growth stocks. We associate growth stocks as typically stocks that pay no dividends. You know, I had a young lady friend, and she kind of got upset with me a little bit. And The problem with you is everything's an investment. I said, well, that guy is an investment. I mean, he's a serious growth opportunity. He gets all that drug stuff fixed and gets back on the career track. He's got nothing but upside.
Yeah.
I said, he pays no dividends. I said, I am not a growth guy. There is zero growth in me. I pay dividends. Boring. That may not be your thing, but hey. Anyway, so growth would be no dividend income. Some stocks pay dividends. Some stocks, some corporations have excess capital, and the board may decide to distribute that to the owners as a dividend. Now, be careful on this. You do not have a right to a dividend. The income stream from a common stock is a dividend. And one of our important concepts is you do not have a right to a dividend as owner. You only have a right to a dividend if declared. So, if the board declares the dividend, then you have a right to it. But that's a big if. Here recently, Intel has said until further notice, no dividends. There's basically saying, listen, we need all the money we have to, try and fix the business. So you have a right to a dividend if declared by the board. And we're going to be talking about that as well. Now, so if we have stocks that pay us perhaps dividend and give us some upside, these two things together, growth and income, are called total return. And so you say, hey, Dean, why do you like the stock? I said, well, it has a good opportunity for total return in considering that I can get both an investment perhaps and maybe some growth in the stock as well. And so those two things together are called total return. What you make from the investment's income stream plus or minus what you make from, buying or selling the investment. So we have large cap stocks, capitalization is the market value of the stock times the number of shares outstanding. So here recently, Teresa, we even have mega caps now, not testable. But boy, a mega stock, a mega cap is $1 trillion plus, right? So NVIDIA, Apple, Amazon. Now, the assumption with this capitalization is that larger cap companies are less risky because they can make more mistakes. Right. I just reading where, what was it, an accounts payable clerk at Macy's, misbilled $156 million. I mean, hey, listen, my world, if I come up missing 156 million, Dean is kind of done. I guess in Macy's scheme of things, it wasn't material, right? I wouldn't worry about large caps. This is kind of, I'm just previewing some of your future exams here. So we will, on your Series 7 and on your Series 66, want to know that the S&P 500 is typically going to be the benchmark for the market as a whole, right? Yeah, I wouldn't worry at all about mid-cap stocks. And again, I wouldn't worry about this on your SIE, but small caps, the benchmark for that. And we should know that on our Series 7 and on our 66 is going to be the Russell 2000. Those are what we call benchmarks for those stocks. Now, penny stocks are very, very testable. You need to know the definition of a penny stock. The definition you see here is a stock under $5 unlisted on the New York Stock Exchange. So if this is a $4 in New York, it's not a penny stock. Or not listed on NASDAQ. Again, if it's $4 and it's on NASDAQ, it's not a penny stock. So there's quite a few test questions here about penny stocks. One is the definition. The second is if I'm soliciting you for a penny stock. If I'm soliciting you, I have to give you a risk disclosure or get a suitability statement saying you understand that you're buying a speculative low price security. Now, that suitability statement and that disclosure to you that you're buying a low price speculative security is not required of established customers. And so you can see how this starts bleeding into lots of potential other test questions. Right? So we've got one, what's a penny stock? And then if we're soliciting for a penny stock, we have to give you the suitability statement, get a signature from you that you understand you're buying speculative low price security. This doesn't apply if you're an established customer, and that means you've had funds with us for a year. So that's our next thing. What's the definition of an established customer? Or you've done 3 trades in a penny stock. At that point, we consider you to be a consenting adult and you know what you're doing. Right? Or, we'll let you be stupid. I'm joking. But one last test question here about penny stocks. I don't know where you're at in your pre-study effort. We've talked about it, Teresa, but I'm going to poke around your brain housing group, and I'm going to be pretty rude by asking you, what is the minimum standard to send somebody a statement? So customer statements from broker dealers to customers, what is our minimum frequency on that?
Just a moment, let me just turn this off.
Very testable, quarterly, unless you have a penny.
I'm sorry, it got cut.
No worries. So I said a couple test questions here. We're kind of drilling down. I kind of blew off the first part of the slide, and we need to know frequency of statements to customers from broker dealers. And for most customers, that's going to be quarterly. And that's testable. And we said what is testable also to know is that if you have a penny stock in your account, we're going to send this to you monthly. Right? So quarterly, unless penny stocks, then you get a monthly statement. Because, these things could be worthless in a week or two, right? I'm joking, but, Did you get to see Wolf of Wall Street?
Oh, yes, I did. Yeah.
Story about a real guy who was a penny stock guy named Jordan Belfort. His firm was called Stratton Oakmont. Now, the thing I don't like about these rules is the assumption is the guy like Jordan Belfort's going to follow them and say, hey, Teresa, I'm sorry, I can't do it right now. I got to get back that suit of me. So sometimes our self-regulatory framework kind of breaks down, right? We're relying on the guy who's the crook to, follow the rules. All right. So we're talking about common stock. We said there were a couple target rich opportunities in that little last slide. If the board declares a dividend, they could declare a dividend in cash. So Bank of America, the board for the last, 2, 3, 4 years, every quarter has got together and declared a 21-cent quarterly dividend. So if Bank of America's quarterly dividend is 21 cents, that means the annual dividend of Bank of America is 42.84 cents. Now, the reason the annual dividend is important is because we're going to test you on current yield. And, current yield is what an investment pays you divided by what it costs you. Now, that cash you receive is taxable. Berkshire Hathaway owned 1 billion shares of Bank of America. Everybody gets 84 cents, but on 1 billion shares, that's a little more exciting. So, 1 billion shares at 84 cents, that's $840 million in dividend income. Like I say, everybody who owns Bank of America gets that 84 cents. It's just, and that 84 cents cash is taxable. So it's a taxable event to receive this. Now, if you're a corporation, which Berkshire Hathaway is, a dividend of one corporation paid to another is 50% tax excludable. So that means they're only going to owe taxes on 420 million of that. Now that's only for corporations. Tax excludable. For an individual investor, that's going to be taxable. It's going to be taxable to you at either ordinary income or at a lower rate than that, depending on how long you have the stock. I wouldn't worry about that as it relates to your SIE. For your SIE, I would just know that cash is a taxable. You're no taxes on any cash you receive from a corporation. Now, if the corporation pays you stock, that is not a taxable event. You don't owe taxes on any stock you receive from the issuer as a result of a stock dividend that we're discussing now or a stock split. So I call you up and I say, hey, Teresa, you know that stock we bought? They just declared a 10% stock dividend. You go, wonderful. Do I owe any taxes on that? I say, you do not. You just have 10% more shares. Everybody, by the way, Teresa, everybody else gets 10% more in my example. So, there's been no change in your proportion ownership as a result of a stock dividend or stock split because you have more shares, but so does everybody else. And you don't owe taxes on that. What we are going to do is adjust our cost base. I say, hey, Teresa, we bought that originally the 100 shares, as you remember, we bought at 50. Your cost basis was $5,000. Cost basis is simply when you turn the money into the security. So when I say your cost basis is $5,000, that means, that's what you have there. Now I say, now, Teresa, your cost basis was and still is $5,000. Was and still is. You spend $5,000 to make that investment. However, you now have 110 shares. 10% of the 100, 110. You have more shares and your cost base is lower. I don't think we're going to make you do it on the SIE, but I say, Teresa, if we take the 5,000, divide by 110, your adjusted cost base is 45.45. So you don't owe taxes, but moving forward, if we sell it for more than that, you're going to have a gain. Less than that, you got a loss. So a couple of things to know about stock dividends and stock splits. To know they are not taxable upon receipt. You just have to adjust your cost basis. I hope you remember me telling you this. You don't do any math here because you're just going to shop your answer set and say, okay, I need more shares, something more than my 100, and I need something less than 50, and there'll only be one answer that says the customer now has more shares at a lower price. So you don't even have to mess with the math. All right, so the last way we can get a dividend, and I like this one, Wrigley's used to give its shareholders a case of gum every quarter. Right, so this is where the corporation says to its owners, here's a case of gum on us for being a shareholder. Now, they stopped doing that because it's kind of a mess. Now, the test, we won't get into the tax consequences of a product dividend. But, in theory, as I chew the gum, I'm supposed to claim the, 50 cents a pack or whatever on my tax return. I haven't seen this till very recently. I don't know because I'm not a shareholder, but I understand when I take mom to the movies at AMC, they say, and thank you, AMC stockholders. And you get it sounds like the shareholders of AMC are getting to come to the movies as part of their dividend. I don't know what the tax consequences of that is or what. Derp. So we have in our business what's called the Uniform Practice Code. And the Uniform Practice Code standardizes trading practices within the securities industry. You can imagine what a mess the securities industry would be if everybody conducted business differently. We all agree we're going to conduct business the same way. And so 3 of the dates that we're discussing here are associated with the board of directors. The board of directors gets together and says, okay, let's declare a dividend. Then they're going to say to shareholders as of record. That means they're going to look at their shareholder list on that date. If your name is there, you get the dividend. Now, in our business, on the Uniform Practice Code, which standardizes practices within the securities industry, regular way settlement is T+1. And so it takes 1 day to show up on the shareholder list. Trade date is when you agree to terms, that's the T. And then settlement is when ownership changes hands. And so, if you buy the stock on the record date, you're not going to be on the list until the day after. You wouldn't get the dividend. If you want to get that dividend, you'd have to buy it the day before the record to actually get the dividend. Now, there's a couple test questions here, and one of them is definitional. They love to say all the following dates are set by the board of directors except, and the X date is not set by the board of directors. It's a function of the Uniform Practice Code, which standardizes practices, trading practices in the securities industry. So, the UPC of New York or NASDAQ, depending on where it trades, right? The next question is, what is the X date? It's the first date on which the stock no longer trades with the dividend attached. Now, if I say, do you have an ex-spouse? That means, you're no longer trading with your spouse attached. I say, what's the last date you were married? That's the day before the divorce. What's the first date you were single? That's the day after the divorce. So we love to put you on this little timeline and get you to mess things up. And the X date, as you can see here, very testable. I'm going to give you some illustrations of this, is the same as the record date. I'm going to illustrate this to you here shortly, right? So, and again, on the test, it won't be in different colors for you as it is here in the slide. You need to know this is not a date. Now, then when are they going to pay the dividend? That's simply when they cut the checks, when they actually send out those checks. All right, so here is a calendar. Here is a calendar of April. And let's say they declare a dividend on April 6th. The board of directors gets together and declares a dividend. Usually we associate dividends again with companies that have excess capital. So let's just assume this is Bank of America. And we said Bank of America, oh my goodness, if they didn't declare their what, now we don't have a right to that 21 cents, but they've been paying it for quite a while. And if they didn't pay it, we go, oh, what happened? Right. So, but let's be clear, we do not have a right to that 21 cents paid quarterly by Bank of America. For years prior, that was 18 cents a quarter. And Teresa, if I was a guessing person, I bet when the board finally does decide to increase the dividend of Bank of America, I bet the next one would be 24 cents, right? Because it was 15, 18. It doesn't have to be, but it's a certain rhythm there to that. And then remember, they said, we're going to look at our shareholder list. And if you're on our shareholder list on April 24th, you get the dividend. Now, as we just discussed, trade date is when you agree to terms. So if you buy this stock on April 23rd, kind of interesting, T+1, you'd be on the shareholder list and you would get the dividend, right? So if you buy it on the 23rd, but if you buy this on the 24th, you buy it on the 24th, you're not on the list. You won't be on the list till the 25th. So kind of interesting here. The last date you could buy this stock and still receive the dividend would be the 23rd. And what they love to do on the test is put you on the cusp of these lines, timelines, and see if you can do it correctly. So if we buy the stock on the 23rd, that is the last date we could buy the stock and receive the dividend. Remember, we said the X date is the first date on which the stock no longer trades with the dividend attached. As I said, this is going to be the same. I'm just trying to get this thing moved over here. Boom, boom. It looks like Dean needs to fix his slide here. The reason the slide is messed up is because it used to be long ago in a far off galaxy. It used to be a different day. And so we don't need to worry about that. Boom. Now we're back in business, I think. Let me see. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. The X date, as we said, test question is the same as the record. It's Friday, April 24th. If you buy the stock on the 24th, you're not going to be on the list and you're not going to get the dividend. And the payable date, who cares, right? So we said all the following dates are set by the board of directors except the X date. And we said the X date is the first date on which the stock no longer trades with the dividend attached. And we said it is not set by the board of directors. All right, so what would we have the expectation of the stock doing? So let's say that Bank of America closes on Thursday, the 23rd at 46.21. So that's the closing market price of Bank of America. And now the 21 cents is not going to be in the corporate shell. So if we said you buy it the day before the X, 23rd, you're going to get this 21 cents. We said if you buy this on the 24th, you're not going to receive this dividend. So we would have the expectation that Bank of America on the X date is going to go down by the amount of the dividend. We would as think that, well, gee, if Bank of America was worth 46.21, with that, we would think it would close at 40, open at 46 the next day. So we would have the expectation the stock is going down by amount of the dividend. All right, so I told you, Teresa, the Uniform Practice Code standardizes trading practices within the securities industry. And another thing that's very important on the test is called the Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct is the ethical behavior that broker-dealers and associated persons owe customers. Now, so whether I can articulate it or not, if I think a broker is not doing the right thing, I think they violate the code of conduct. You know, maybe I stand outside their door and say, ask them about the code of conduct. They don't follow it here. I bet I wouldn't be out front too long before somebody would say, gee, Steen, what seems to be the problem? One violation of the code of conduct is called selling dividends. Selling dividends. Selling dividends is when we're using this X date as an artifice, an artificial sense of urgency that doesn't actually exist. You know, I don't know if there's a code of conduct. I don't know if there's a code of conduct in the car business. But, you know, Mom was looking to buy a new car on a Friday, and I was out of town. And Mom called me, and she said that the car dealer was telling her that if she didn't buy the car today, she would be losing the financing incentive because it goes away at the end of the day. And I said, well, Mom, that, you know, I don't know what to tell you. I said, I believe in human depravity and original sin, Mom, and that may just be an artifice, an artificial sense of urgency that doesn't exist to kind of close you on that car. Mm-hmm. Now, what I would tell them is if you can't wait till your son gets back, that you're just going to, you know, buy the car elsewhere. There's all kinds of dealers in Las Vegas, and I bet that we'd find one that would be willing to make that offer. Yeah. Anyways, you know, she said, oh, he just heard you, Dean, and he said he'll leave it open just for me till Monday. I go, okay, whatever. All right. So now here we go again with this idea, right? So if I'm going to take advantage of you, I call you and I say, hey, Teresa, if you buy this day stock today, the 23rd, the day before the X, you get the dividend. But if you wait till tomorrow, no dividend for you. You say, well, Dean, isn't it going down by the amount of the dividend? Wouldn't I be better served to buy it at 46 instead of 46.21 and not create that unnecessary tax situation? I go, well, gee, you're no fun. She go, Dean, can I talk to your supervisor? So selling dividends is a big no-no. Remember the other one we talked about with mutual funds, breakpoint sales? So it's
Yes.
not when you pass your exam and say, oh, I want to do some breakpoint sales and sell some dividends and do some churning and do some front running. These are all bad, bad, bad things. Things we're not supposed to do. All right. So we're talking about equity securities. One of the great things about equity securities, as we just said, is if it's a publicly held stock on New York or NASDAQ, T+1, man, you can turn it back into money. Right? I was reading Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer certainly lives in a different world than Dean lives in, but the Clippers were for sale, and there were a lot of the billionaires circling. And some of those billionaires that were circling and considering buying the Clippers were Oprah Winfrey and a guy named David Geffen. And anyway, Steve Ballmer said, one thing I have as an advantage in an auction like that is that my net worth is very liquid. I have $60 billion worth of Microsoft stock. And even if Oprah and Geffen, I certainly believe they're billionaires. But do I think they could come up with a couple $1 billion overnight? I do not. He said, so I decided to come in at $2 billion with a knockout bid. I'm thinking that 2 billion just knock everybody out of there. And he said, so I sold 2 billion of my $60 billion of Microsoft stock. And boom, now I got 58 billion in Microsoft and $2 billion tied up in the Clippers. Since then, Teresa, his microstock has tripled. So I guess he got the Clippers for free, right? Because now he has
Yeah.
100.
In a way,
That's
yes.
kind of cool, right? I saw Mark Cuban. He said one of the reasons he's selling the controlling interest in the Mavericks is he's no longer competing with peers. He said when he bought the Mavericks, he was kind of the richest guy in the NBA as an owner. And now there's guys like Ballmer. And he said, I can't compete at that level. I mean, I used to be able to buy draft picks and do things. And I thought it was interesting that he's selling to the Adelson family, which has billions of dollars in Venetian stock, casino stock. So, it's a different kind of wealth. Now, for us, that's the great thing about stocks. It has a freely transferable interest. What we've got to be able to do here on the exam is contrast this with things that do not have a freely transferable interest. For example, like partnerships. You can't get in or out of a partnership without the permission of the general partner. So here, things that do have freely transferable interest means they have, but what I'm trying to get at is there's liquidity in this investment. It's easy to turn this, stock into the money and money into the stock. Now you have a limited access to the books and records as a shareholder, as an owner. The financials mean you're going to get 3 10Qs and a 10K. Those are your quarterly reports and your annual reports.
Mhm.
And in those 10Qs and 10Ks, you're going to receive financial statements. The big ones you're going to receive are a balance sheet and an income statement. I have a friend and she has a big position in Salesforce, and every once in a while she gets a little wobbly on that investment, and she'll call me and I'll say, well, why don't we wait till we get the next quarterly report to see what's going on, before we do anything kind of rash. I think you should diversify? I say, yeah, I think you should, but minutes of the directors meetings. You have the first right of refusal on the issuance of new stock. You have the first right of refusal on the issuance of new stock. You have a right to maintain your proportionate ownership. This is called your preemptive right on the issuance of new stock. And as I said, this is your right. We're talking about rights and privileges you have. You have a right to transfer your interest to anybody you'd like. You have a right to receive financial information. You have a right to receive minutes on the directors' meetings, and you have a right to maintain your proportion ownership. And so the mechanism for this is going to be a rights offering. Oh, I just now notice the slide says that. Rights offering is how we do this. So for every share you have, you're going to have a right. I say, hey, Teresa, remember you bought that 1,000 shares at the initial public offering at $10,000. And, they went public. They sold 1,000,000 shares at 10 million to build a new macro brewery to take on the world. And I don't know if you've been following the situation, but, they had some glitches. And, it's not been so good. And you said, well, Dean, yeah, actually, I'm looking, the stock is now 5. I said, well, Teresa, I think it could still have a happy ending. I mean, if they can get this brewery online, I think it could still work. And what they need is some additional equity financing. And so the most likely persons to provide the additional financing are the people already in the hot water with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have 1,000 shares, you have 1,000 rights. You have a right to maintain your proportion ownership. You don't have to participate in this rights offering if you don't want to. Now, if they can raise this money from existing shareholders like you, they won't have to hire an investment banker. And so they're going to let you subscribe at less than the current market price. That's testable. So in a rights offering, the existing shareholders are going to be able to subscribe at less than the current market price. That's to give you an incentive to come up with the money. So in my hypothetical, I said the market price is 5, not less than you paid, because remember you paid 10. And maybe they say, we're going to let you subscribe at 4. And you say, well, Dina, in theory, being able to subscribe at 4 when the stock's at 5 is worth $1. I go, yep, in theory. And the reality, something is only worth what someone else is willing to pay. Now, it also makes sense, test question, there's 2 test questions here, that these are short term. And it makes sense they're short term because the issuer needs the money and it needs it now. So there are 2 test questions on your SIE about rights. And the 2 test questions about rights are that they are subscribed. You can subscribe at less than the current market price. Another way we might say that is they're exercisable at less than the current market price. And they're short term. And you say, well, Dean, how are these different than warrants? And I said, oh, you must be studying, because that is exactly the test point. We have to be able to contrast rights with warrants. Warrants are long-term, and warrants are exercisable above the current market price. So you got to be able on the test to contrast rights with warrants. A warrant is usually used as a sweetener. So, I call you up and I say, hey, Teresa, are you familiar with a unit? And he said, well, no, I'm not familiar with a unit. I say, Teresa, a unit is more than one security offered together. So I have 2 securities I'd like to share with you this morning, and I'd like you to buy it whole. And at some point, we're hoping the 2 separate securities are worth more trading separately. So let's go over the first part of this investment. I'd like you to lend this biotech company, Teresa, $100,000. I'd like you to buy $100,000 of their debentures. They pay 6%. So get $3,000 on January 1st, $3,000 on July 1st, assuming they don't default. You say, what's the rating? I say, well, it's a biotech company. They're not rated. We think this biotech company could become the next Amgen or Genentech. It's an acorn right now, but we think it could become an oak tree. Not every acorn becomes an oak tree. Some acorns just end up as squirrel food, but it has potential. And you say, so Dean, everything goes according to plan. And I get, for what, 10 years is this thing? 10 years, I get 6, and I get my principal back. I go, Teresa, I agree that if that's all I had for you today, you might take a pass. But I have a sweetener. Sweeteners get people to eat things they otherwise wouldn't eat. I say, here's the sweetener. Each of these bonds have warrants to buy the stock out to the year 2034. Warrants are long term. You say, what's the stock? I say, the stock right now, Teresa, is 5. You say, what's the exercise? I say 6. And you say, well, right now that makes no sense. I go, well, yeah, right now that makes no sense, but between now and 2034, let's hope it does, right? So that's the test question. You'll be able to contrast rights with warrants. Now, we started this discussion today by talking about the corporate charter, right? And in the corporate charter, it will stipulate what kind of voting we use. Are we going to use statutory voting? Or in our corporate charter, are we going to have cumulative voting? Are we going to have in our corporate charter super voting? Woo! The super voting would be, more votes per share, right? So here, if we're doing statutory voting, kind of boring. BFC Inc., 100 yes, 100 yes, no, 100 yes, no, 100 yes, no. We're voting on 3 board seats. Boring. I think of it kind of like propositions on the ballot. If I'm voting on these propositions and there's 3 propositions, I just get to simply vote yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. A little more fun would be cumulative voting. Woohoo! With cumulative voting, a little more exciting. Now, in my example of having 3 propositions on the ballot, I have 3 votes and I can spin them in any fashion I'd like. So here it says CES, unlike BFC in the previous slide, the corporate charter of BFC Inc. said they're using statutory voting, which is the most common style of voting. And then here it says CES in their corporate charter, they're using cumulative voting. So now it's a little more exciting. I say, Teresa, there are 4 board seats open, and we're going to be voting on those. You have 100 shares. We're voting on 4 board seats, so you have 400 votes, and you can spend them in any fashion you'd like. Woohoo! So it looks like you like that candidate for board 4 because you're putting more votes on him or her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you could put all 400 votes there, and then you don't vote on anything else. This particular company uses cumulative voting. I told you most companies use statutory, but this guy was the single largest shareholder of the company, but not a controlling shareholder. And the company has cumulative voting, and he decided he wanted to get back on the board. So he simply put all his votes on himself. Hi guys, I'm back. Him and 6 guys who can't stand him. Now the boards are usually staggered so that we're not taking out the whole board in one kind of fell swoop, but the next election, he voted for his attorney, him and his attorney, and, now what, 5 guys that can't stand him. Then he recruited an activist shareholder. So this protects smaller shareholders because at any one board seat or any one issue, they can load up. Now, one other point, some companies have super voting shares. Elon wishes he had these in Tesla, but Elon showed up after Tesla had already had a corporate charter. And so his shares aren't super voting. But, the reason he's upset is because his pals, Elon Musk pals like Zuckerberg, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, they have super voting shares. And test question, that's more than 1 vote per share. Now, for example, you and I are not kicking the Ford family out of the Ford Motor Company. The Ford family, Teresa, owns Ford Motor B stock. It's just like the A stock, except it has 10 votes per share. So, when it comes time to vote on something, say, wait a minute, the B shares haven't voted yet. Bam. Right? I brought up Zuckerberg. His Facebook stock has 100 votes per share. Nobody else has Facebook stock that has anything other than 1 vote per share.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that we're going to kick Zuckerberg out of there is probably not likely. Right? So
And so, and on the statutory voting, I can, if I have 100 shares, I
Yep.
can put
You're
my
voting
100
100.
shares
You're going to
in
vote three
one.
board seats, 100 yes, no, 100 yes, no, 100 yes, no.
Oh, so I cannot divide it to 33
No, no,
shares
no,
here.
not right. Let's just change the cumulative. You'd have 300 votes. You can spend them any way you want. This is statutory. But if BFC wanted to, they could amend their corporate charter, right? Amend their corporate charter, take a shareholder vote and say, we would like to change our voting from statutory to cumulative. And if the majority of the shares said yes, well, now next time we would vote, this would be 300 votes and you can spend them in any fashion you'd like.
Mhm,
I've been thinking that that would be the easiest thing for Elon is just to amend the corporate charter of Tesla,
mhm.
take a shareholder vote and say, he's kind of upset. He wants more skin in the game from Tesla. And, if I was on the board, I'd say, well, why don't we give him these shares that, let's swap his shares for super voting shares. And then he could be like, Zuckerberg thing. Not that he needs it. I mean,
Yeah, he's good how he is, I
yeah.
think.
Benefits and risks of common stock. We talked about this. You have growth and capital appreciation, income. You have limited liability. There's no such thing as a stock that goes to -5, right? I mean, it just goes to zero. Now, it sounds like a bad thing, but that's a good thing, right? That you can't lose more than you actually put into the stock. Well, capitalism without failure is kind of like religion without hell. And so, the risk you have is that the business fails. The dividends, as we said, are not guaranteed. We said you only have a right to a dividend if declared by the board of directors. If we sell off all the assets of the corporation and we pay off all the liabilities, you would have a residual claim. Now, we don't assume we're going to liquidate the security, the corporation, but that happens. We have Chapter 7 bankruptcy where that's exactly what happens in that situation. We do have a theoretical liquidation value that investors look at. And the theoretical liquidation value of a corporation is its book value. So, it's all about answer sets. And we have on the test, if I ask you the theoretical liquidation value of business, we say book value.
But what is the book value?
Uh, Book value represents the classical balance sheet equation, Teresa, is assets minus
Okay.
liabilities equals net worth. And in corporations, that net worth is shareholder equity. And so what we're asking is if we sold off all the assets, paid off all the liabilities, what would that residual claim be? Residual claim means book value, right? And so we also have what's called par value. Par value is just an arbitrary number we use to set up the books. And we discussed earlier market value, which is supply and demand relationship. This is kind of I don't know, embarrassing. I don't know if it's embarrassing or not, but JP Morgan trades at 1.2 times book. So the market value of JP Morgan, 1.2 times book. So that means it's worth more in the secondary marketplace than it is if we liquidate JP Morgan. Citigroup is trading at 60% of book value. That means its market value is 60% less than its book value. It's actually worth more dead than it is alive. Now, I've
Mm,
read a value investor who thinks that makes it a good value investment because he thinks this new, I don't think relatively new, her name I think is Jane Fraser, but she's the lady running Citigroup. And his thesis is if she can get it to 80% book, that's going to be a good investment for you. If you buy it at 60% book and now market is 80, you make some money. And I was reading, she just sold off, I think, well, I shouldn't say she, the board, the company, right? Divested themselves, I think, of their Mexican operations. She's trying to, gather assets and, do what she's going to do, right? I don't know if Citigroup has any exposure in Brazil, but maybe she decides to, sell that off, Maybe she calls up Banco Santander and says, hey, buy some resilient assets. All right, so preferred stock, you have preferential treatment in two areas. Liquidation. So my example just previously, if we liquidate the assets, we pay off the liabilities. We have to pay off the shareholders, the preferred shareholders, and dividends, liquidation and dividends. We can talk about ADRs, and then we're going to talk about control and restricted stock. We're running a little over, but that's okay. I want to make sure we finish this. All right, so preferred stock has a fixed rate of return. So Bank of America used to have a preferred stock that paid 6%. That 6% is based on par. Par is 100. So if you own this Bank of America 6% preferred, you would expect $6 annually, $1.50 quarterly. And that Bank of America preferred stock would have priority over the common stock of Bank of America in both dividends and liquidation. That's testable. It has no voting rights. So the 50 million shares of the 6% Bank of America stock, the 50 million shares, all of it was owned by Berkshire Hathaway. All of it. Wow. That 50 million shares was a pipe. It was a pipe. It was a private investment in a public equity, public entity. So what had happened is the QIB, the qualified institutional buyer, Berkshire Hathaway is a QIB, a qualified institutional buyer of securities. What that means is if you have assets under management of 100 million, Teresa, you can buy unregistered securities, foreign and domestic. And so, what happened in 2010 is Berkshire Hathaway reached out to Bank of America and said, hey, could you use $5 billion in equity financing? And Bank of America said, yeah, that would be wonderful. And they say, okay, well, if you issue us 6% Bank of America preferred stock, we'll buy every share. Now, they were voting on whether Brian Moynihan could be both the CEO of Bank of America and chairman of the board of directors. And they asked Berkshire Hathaway what they thought. And I love it. Test question. Warren Buffett said, our preferred stock, our 50 million shares doesn't vote. That's testable. He said, but if it did vote, we would vote in favor of that. Now, I thought that was kind of nice. He didn't have to say that. He said, we could vote. We would vote in favor. And he says, we don't own any Bank of America stock presently common, but we do have 700 million warrants to buy Bank of America that we will be exercising. And then when we do have the common stock, we don't have it yet, those shares will be voting with management. I thought, boy, talk about a bromance. I mean, Warren is basically saying he's on Brian's team, and Brian's go, woo, All right, so preferred stock, we have two versions of this. Straight, non-cumulative. Now, Teresa, sometimes my brother and I have a major misunderstanding because I think my loans to him are cumulative. He thinks they're non-cumulative. So he just thinks, we're building this off-grid location. And I've told my brother that he needs to make sure his solar is, squared away because, we're off-grid here. And he's going to hit me up for a number to get his solar squared away. Right now, I tell mom to add that to Chris's tab. Right. So he probably doesn't know he's got a tab in my mind, right? So he just thinks this is a new discussion about another couple $1,000. And then you can see, I think it's cumulative. Now, if it's cumulative preferred, so straight means if you miss it, there's no arrears, you just try better next time. I always joke, wouldn't I love it if my phone bill were non-cumulative? That means I miss it, there's no arrears. They just say, hey, try better next time. Cumulative preferred means it goes into arrears. We're going to be talking about that. Convertible allows you to switch your status from being a preferred stockholder to being a common stockholder. Participating allows you to participate in excess earnings beyond some stipulated amount. And then nobody can predict interest rates. And preferred stock, while it's equity on the company's balance sheet, it is in my customer's portfolio a fixed income investment vehicle. What I mean by that is in my example of Bank of America, you're not getting more than 6%. And Bank of America in that transaction said, well, listen, we would like to be able to replace the high cost preferred 6% with lower cost preferred. So we want to have a right to call that 6% preferred. So one of the risks you have in fixed income investment vehicles was what's called call risk. Call risk is associated with a declining interest rate environment. I always joke if anybody ever asks you about economics, finance, investments, and you want to sound smart, you should say it has a lot to do with interest rates. And if you just shut up, you sound pretty good. So he says, well, what about them? You say they fluctuate. They say, is that good news or is that bad news? And you say, well, it depends. Can you tell me more? So in the Bank of America example, Bank of America said, we'd like to be able to call this. And we'd like to be able to call this in 5 years at 105. So what Bank of America has said is that they are going to give the investors call protection. Call protection means they said they're not going to call it for at least 5 years. And if they do call it, they'll call it at 105. So call protection consists of two things: the time, how long before the issuer can refinance, can call it away, and at what price. Is there a prepayment penalty? So here the call protection is 5 years at 105. Adjustable rate pays you against some base rate. So I say, Teresa, as the base rate goes up, so goes this payment, right? So maybe the base rate is SUCR, the secured overnight financing rate. And I say, Teresa, this pays 100 bips, 1% over that rate. So if SUCR is 4, you get 5. SUCR is 5, you get 6. SUCR goes back to 4, you get 5. It goes against that base rate and moves against some base rate. So these are the various types of preferreds we have. Straight non-cumulative, where there's no arrears.
Mm-hmm.
Cumulative preferred, where the dividend goes into arrears and you cannot pay a dividend to common until you take care of the arrears. Convertible, where you can switch your status from being a preferred stockholder to common. And that would be based on what we call the conversion ratio. And participating and beyond some excess earnings as stipulated in the prospectus, right? So those are various types of preferreds. Now, the easiest way for U.S. investors to expose themselves or get some diversification from foreign stock is to buy an American depository receipt. This is very testable. In an American depository receipt, what I'm buying is the foreign branch of a domestic bank. You got to be a little careful because you have an international perspective, but foreign branch domestic bank means Bank of New York, and this is their Sao Paulo branch. And what I'm buying is that they have a receipt for those shares. So we said the ADR facilitates the trading of foreign securities in the US. I could buy Petrobras in Brazil, but then I got to worry about, what is the settlement and how's that work? And, right. So foreign securities traded in our domestic US market. And the other test question is we have currency risk, right? Because the underlying business is conducted in the foreign currency. And we got to turn the foreign currency back into dollars, right? So ADRs can best be characterized, test question, as foreign securities traded in the U.S. market. And you have currency risk because the underlying business is conducted in that foreign currency. All right, the last thing for today's session is this discussion of what we call restricted stock. We might even think of this as unregistered stock. Stock that has never gone through the process of 33. We've been talking in today's session about a guy named Larry Ellison. And, Elon had invited Larry Ellison to join the board of Tesla. And Teresa, to show his support for Tesla, he went out and bought 5 million shares in the secondary market. Those shares in Tesla have been registered. Now, for serving on the board, he also got Tesla stock directly from Tesla. That stock has never been registered. And so what we're talking about here is how do we turn unregistered stock into registered stock? That's one component of Rule 144. The second component is volume limitations. Okay, so let's look at our first one here. Restricted stock held by a non-affiliate. So this is stock you got directly from the issuer. Now, in the old days when we had stock certificates, you would have a stock certificate and it would have nasty red letters on it that said stop transfer. There'd be a legend. I said, man, Teresa, where'd you get this stock? You must have got it directly from the issuer because it has these nasty red letters on it that say stop transfer. It has a legend. I would like to remove that nasty legend so you could sell this in the secondary market. How long have you had it? One of my favorite examples of this was the company invited Beyonce to come sing to their employees. They asked Beyonce, what we'd like to do, if you're okay with this, Beyonce, is instead of giving you money, we'd like to give you stock to come sing to us. And she said, well, how much stock are we talking? And they said, well, we're thinking about giving you $10 million in unregistered stock. She goes, I'll be there. Okay, so Beyonce now has 10 million shares of stock that's never been registered. So she's not an officer, she's not a director, she's not a principal stockholder. She is not a control person. And so after 6 months, what can Beyonce do? She can sell if she wants to. Okay, restricted stock held by an affiliate. Now we call this stock held by the affiliate. We call this control stock. Control stock is all the stock that's held by control persons. And those would be officers, directors, principal stockholders, and their immediate family members. And so they're always going to be subject to the volume limitations, regardless of how they got the stock. So if it's restricted stock, red letter, legend stock, they're going to have to hold it 6 months. But they're always subject to the volume limitations. So we don't care how Larry Ellison got the stock in Tesla. He's always subject to volume limitations because he's a control person. He's a director, right? As I told you, he's also got stock he bought in the secondary market. So he's got two kinds of stock in Tesla. He's got restricted stock he got directly from Tesla for serving on the board, and the 5 million shares he bought in the secondary market. Doesn't matter how he got it, he's always subject to the volume limitations. So the stock he got in the secondary market, he doesn't have to hold it for 6 months, but he's not going to be allowed to call and say, sell 2 billion shares or whatever. That would destroy the public marketplace. So always going to be subject to volume limitations. Now, I have a good, I think, memory aid device for this called 144. 144. The volume limitations, in my example of Larry, of what he can sell, is 1% of the outstanding stock of Tesla, or the average of the last 4 weeks trading volume in Tesla, whichever is greater, up to 4 times a year. So he's going to file a form. It's called Form 144. And that form has to be filed at or prior to selling. 4 weeks trading volume, up to 4 times a year. So my example, Larry files the form. The form is good for 90 days, and now he can sell up to 1% of the outstanding shares of Tesla, or the average of the last 4 weeks trading volume, up to 4 times a year. Now, because the idea here is we're going to prevent these people from disturbing the public marketplace. when I was a practitioner, Teresa, I would track these forms. One time I called a guy and he said, Dean, it's surprising you're calling me right about now. I just sold a bunch of stock. I go, I know. It's not a coincidence. He goes, well, how do you know that? I said, because I just saw the Form 144 you filed. That's why I'm calling. He goes, that's public information. I go, absolutely. You public information, right? All right, let's give you an example of this. Let's give you an example of this. So here we'll assume that we're a control person. We're an officer, director, principal stockholder, or their immediate family. We filed our form. As we said, once we file Form 144, we got to do it at or prior. It's good for 90 days. And we can sell up to 1% of the outstanding shares or the average last 4 weeks trading volume. So last 4 weeks trading volume is 440. We divide that by 4, 10 million shares outstanding. So this guy can sell 110,000 shares. A good way to remember it is 144. You can sell up to 1% of the outstanding stock or the average last 4 weeks trading volume up to 4 times a year. Okay, so another good session we've done so far, mutual funds, we've done stocks, we've now done bonds, so I think we're in pretty good shape in
Yes.
terms of what we're doing. I'll send you a copy of the video, and I'll send you a copy of the slide deck as well.